an understatement to say that Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt have sat white-faced with fury throughout that budget announcement. And Jeremy Hunt, former Chancellor, former Health Secretary, looked particularly enraged throughout the whole experience and just kept shouting lies, lies, lies at the Chancellor when she was giving her speech. We'll have all the reaction here, both from you and from experts too. Natasha Clark, LBC's political editor, will speak to us in just a second about the politics of all of this. And we are joined in the studio by the Chief Executive of the New Economics Foundation, Danny Sriskandarajah, who's here to help with us interpreting it and any calls you might have about budget questions that relate directly to your life. You can also go online at lbc.co.uk/budget to follow our live blog and coverage. Welcome to you, Danny. We'll get to your thoughts in just a second. Just from Natasha Clark, LBC's political editor. That was a long budget speech, inevitably, I suppose, with £40 billion to raise.
Yep, you've got a lot of taxes to go up, and she obviously hasn't listed anywhere near what we expect to be in the small print of that book, which should be dropping online and in our hands pretty soon. But yeah, tax, £40 billion worth of that, the highest tax rating budget we believe that's ever happened in Britain. And there were a lot of new details in there about exactly how she's going to raise that, expanding the sugar tax, new carbon border taxes, capital gains tax like we did expect, a new private jets tax. We're going to dub it the Taylor tax, aren't we, Sheila?
The Taylor Swift tax. I think you should take all credit for
Okay,
that.
I'll take the credit for that. The Taylor tax
will
slap £450 on each private jet.
Each passenger?
Each passenger per private jet, which obviously will raise a little bit of money for the Treasury. More taxes on cigarettes, Rollies especially, going up by 10%. Bad news if you're a Rollies smoker. The vapes tax as well, which we knew was coming from the government, and now a confirmation that that's going to be in place in around a year's time. Employers' national insurance too, inheritance tax, second home tax, lots and lots of taxes, and I'm sure there will be far more to come when we do get into the nitty-gritty of details from that Red Book.
And Danny, on initial impact, what's on your mind? What are you thinking?
Well, the word that comes to mind is courage. I think this is a courageous budget from Britain's first female Chancellor. She has a tough inheritance, but she also had to make some tough choices. I think she'll be judged on whether this budget and subsequent budgets really do improve public services. I think that's at the top of
growth.
And growth.
Growth.
Polling suggests that the British people will judge this government on improving the NHS, our schools, our libraries, our communities more than anything else, and that they'll be prepared to accept some degree of taxes or more borrowing. So I think that's going to be the critical test. Will this make a difference to hospital waiting lists, to what our kids are experiencing in schools up and down the country?
And those big increases in borrowing are what Rishi Sunak chose to weigh in on, weren't they? As well as the taxes for working people and that debate that we've been having for a week and a bit now.
Yeah, look, I suspect my colleagues back in the office are having a field day trying to understand some really important tweaks to the government's budgeting rules, if you will, where we often call them fiscal rules. So what the Chancellor has just announced is that the basis on which government debt is assessed, if you will, is going to change. It might not mean very much to a lot of people, but it will increase the amount that this government will be able to borrow, at least in the short term, to invest in capital, in new buildings, new schools, new hospitals, or in new infrastructure like the green energy infrastructure that we need. So that is going to be a big change, I think.
I thought it was interesting claim from Rishi Sunak there just before we came out of his speech, his response. He accused the Chancellor and Labour more widely of destroying our flexible labour market. What was he alluding to there, do you think?
Yeah, I really worry about that phrase because flexible labour market can often mean a labour market. Yeah, cheap. And that's the last thing this country needs. We want to protect the worst off in our society. Surely we don't want to live in a country as we have been where, people who are working are finding themselves living in poverty, facing a cost of living crisis. And so I admire what the Chancellor has done, for example, on raising the minimum wage, including for young people. So I do think that we need to sort of test that notion. Yes, we want flexibility, but we want to protect those hard-won rights and entitlements that we have.
And politically, Natasha, both the Chancellor and the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, both look pretty relaxed in the face of that onslaught, really, from Sunak. It couldn't be more different from the tone that you and I and James were talking about in PMQs, because it's worth reminding people who might not know, it's Rishi Sunak's final PMQs, his final, his only response to the budget, I guess. But they look pretty relaxed about this.
Yeah, they did. And I don't think actually behind the scenes they are very relaxed about this. I think they will be incredibly nervous about how this is all going to land in the next few days, which is, again, why I think we've seen so much pitch rolling over the past few weeks and, let's be honest, months. They've been talking about this being a painful budget. And, Keir Starmer said before the election he had no plans to raise taxes. And he is absolutely being, whether it's courageous, whether it's politically risky, he is going to raise our taxes by potentially the highest raising taxes in one budget in one go. That's going to be a big, big risk for him. I don't think behind the scenes in the Treasury in Number 10 they will be as relaxed. They will all be waiting, I think, quite nervously to see how this lands, to see how people react and whether the public feels that is a price worth paying to fix the NHS, to plug more money in schools. It's a bit New Labour-y, isn't it, actually? More money for the NHS, more money for schools. But yes, will it be enough? Will people be prepared to take that political sacrifice and pay more money? And of course, pay more borrowing as well. Are we going to be the fastest growing country in the G7? That growth that Rachel Reeves has promised us, she's talking about £100 billion worth of spending commitments up over the next 5 years. But that is going to mean extra borrowing. And if it does spook the markets, if it does end up accidentally having some sort of impact on interest rates, they are going to have a really, really big problem on their hands if indeed that does spook markets, as it may do. People aren't going to forgive them if they create another mini Liz Truss style mini budget.
And I want to talk more about the OBR, the Office of Budget Responsibility, in a few minutes. But just briefly on that, they have said that these budget plans look like over the next few years that it will increase inflation by 0.4% overall.
So looking at the inflation forecast, they're quite similar to the inflation forecast that we had in the last budget anyway. The inflation
2 point this, 2 point that.
Exactly, yeah. So it's expected, I think, to peak next year around 2.6% and then go back down again to the government's and the Bank of England's target of 2%. So if that's correct, it doesn't look too much like inflation is going to be a long-term problem for the government, which will be really, really good news, and obviously good news for Rachel Reeves when she's borrowing billions of pounds extra, because obviously inflation is going to have a bit of a knock-on impact on that. But that is obviously good news for her, good news for our wallets, hopefully. And at the same time, we're seeing these big increases in the minimum wage and things like that, which is really going to help, according to the Chancellor, our cost of living, and of course dealing with things like child poverty. And she says that that's another reason why we're not seeing things like the 2-child benefit cap, but she's trying to make sure that this poverty strategy that the government is working on is going to help living standards in other ways.
Thank you very much indeed, Natasha Clark, LBC's political editor.